Just so you know you're in the presence of greatness, you may not notice that this year the New South Wales Scientist of the Year was Professor Glenda Halliday. And the reason for that is because she's real smart. We just cling to Glenda and say, tell us what to do, please, Glenda. And what we've asked her to do with this presentation is to try and answer the question, how can we go forwards with trying to cure these diseases? So thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, big ask, how to cure anything. I'm assuming I will get a Nobel Prize if I can cure things.
Volume okay, or do you want the handheld? Is that any better? Do you want to try that hand?
Is that better? Okay.
I'll stand this on.
Okay. You just heard Eli, who was actually talking to you about Parkinson's with dementia, and I'll say to you that in the first 8 years that it's very rare to actually get dementia. The Sydney multi-centre study actually showed that over time, it's a time dependent. And if you, it'd be interesting to know, I mean, if you're actually good at lifestyle factors and everything, and you've had good genes, then not everybody gets dementia. So that's the thing to think about. What he did show, and also what you all would know, is that Parkinson's is complex. Everyone really has a slightly different form of Parkinson's. What affects you at any one time is generally slightly different. And so while the clinicians are very good at actually saying Parkinson's disease, as if it's all the same, everyone actually has it slightly differently. And so Parkinson's is actually complex. And at the moment, there's a whole host of very clever people internationally trying to figure out how we can parcel Parkinson's disease into subtypes of Parkinson's disease. Now, the reason for that is that there's a variety of ways to get the disease, and there's a variety of things that will influence its progression. Now, we know there's a variety of ways to get the disease because if you look up, and they've actually now done a lot of genomics on patients, and we know that there's a variety of different genes that can actually be abnormal, and you can still get what's called Parkinson's disease. So even at the genetic level, a variety of different things that impact on your genome can give you the same disease. But there's actually other things, you know, people can have a viral infection. The Spanish flu, for example, went around the world in the 1930s. A number of people ended up with Parkinsonian symptoms, but not everybody who had the Spanish flu actually got Parkinson's symptoms. So we know that there's a variety of things that can actually affect people. Some of them will actually cause them to have a symptom, and some of them won't. And then there's a variety of things that will facilitate the disease. And then there will be a variety of things that will aggravate how fast or how slow it goes. For example, if you are good at having healthy lifestyle habits, keeping active, that actually is one of the things that can prevent the aggravation of the disease, at least for some people. So it's complex. And that's because there's not a single cause and there's not a single thing that will affect everybody. And that's why at the moment we don't have what people call cures. We also know now from a lot of the cellular studies that we've done that there's a variety of mechanisms at the cell level that will affect Parkinson's disease. Now, the one thing that everybody does have is a problem with their dopamine in a particular cell group in the brain. So that's a thing that's actually universal for people that have Parkinson's. But why that happens can be quite different. And this is not an exhaustive list because since this list was prepared, there's additional things that have actually been found that might affect the cell processes that affect dopamine in the brain. So one of them is mitochondria, which is a sort of like each cell battery for energy in the cell. We know that proteins can aggregate, as you heard from Eli, But in some people that will be a dominant thing, and in others only a small number of cells might have protein aggregation. Autophagy is involved, and that's where it's sort of the garbage system of the cell gets a problem. Inflammation can become a problem in the brain, and then how much calcium is used. Each of your heart and your brain uses calcium for exciting the cells, and they're two of the organs in the brain that actually use electrical activity, and that's based off calcium currents. So all of these are variable, and each person will have a variety, more or less, of one of those. The constant is dopamine. So it's complex. I can't tell you exactly which of those would be a problem for any individual. Now, it's not the only complex disease. Diabetes, there's a number of other things that are complex. And what we do know is that complex progressive diseases are unlikely to be cured by a single target drug therapy. Even diabetes, even though we have insulin, it doesn't cure the disease. It just stops stops some of the symptoms, but the insulin-producing cells are still gone. So what we can do is we can try to reduce the complexity, and that's using precision approaches. And I'll go through what that means, because it's how medicine is actually focusing for the future, and then come back to how it's beginning to be done for patients with Parkinson's disease. So what is precision medicine? When people say that, what does it mean? And so it's an emerging approach for disease treatment and prevention that takes into account individual variability. And this is across a variety of things: the genes you have, the environment impact that you have, the lifestyle that you have, each of which we know affects people's complex diseases. This approach allows doctors and researchers to predict more accurately which treatments and prevention strategies for a particular disease will work in which group of people, because we now know more about that individual. It is in contrast to the actual current way we treat people, which is the one-size-fits-all approach, in which the disease treatment and prevention strategies are developed for an average person with less consideration for the difference between individuals. So with the one-size-fits-all, we get very good symptomatic relief. So we can give you dopamine. We know that happens for everybody. It's a one-size-fits-all, but it doesn't cure the disease. So by looking more at individual features, we should be able to then figure out what is the problem, which of those cell pathways are involved for you particularly, and therefore how we can go forward to treat it. So this is just a cartoon showing. On the bottom there, we have the one-size-fits-all, the traditional approach. You have a group of people. We know you all have differences. Why you would have the disease, how it happened, what your triggers are over time, what you're doing now to help it or not. We know you're all different, but we treat you all the same. We give you all the same pill. And some people it will benefit greatly. Some people have much less benefit, and some people it does nothing at all. So that's the current position. If we actually can look at deep phenotyping, and you heard some of that from Eli's talk, where he was concentrating on dementia and getting to the different aspects of dementia that we can actually look at. We can then try to identify people that have more grouped together, so individuals that are more like each other than actually out of that large population. And then we can have more focused treatment. We can actually look at drugs that might already be in the public domain that might affect some of those cellular processes. For example, we have a number of drugs that hit calcium because of the heart failures and the heart diseases that people have, and that's another excitable tissue. So then we could also invent new drugs, because we'll know what it is that is the main problem for a particular group, and therefore we can focus on new drugs. And then hopefully the outcome would be every person would benefit because we're actually tailoring the treatment to that person's problem. So that's precision medicine. It's meant to help us identify the right patient with the right drug at the right dose at the right time. And with a progressive disease, that may mean that it's monitoring over time so that we can make sure that you might have changed medications depending on how those aggressors or facilitators are occurring during the time you might have the disease. Now, this is something that hasn't happened yet for Parkinson's, but last year, the Australian government is the first of the governments around the world to actually invest and fast-track precision medicine. And they've done this for rare cancers because at the moment you can't, there's very few people that have these diseases and it's very hard then to treat them. Cancer treatment really has been radically transformed because of precision medicine, and they now use genomic technologies and environmental factors to identify who it will be that will benefit from any drug. They can then design the drug for that particular cancer, and these are rare cancers, so in some instances it's a very few people that will actually benefit from the drug. They have biomarkers, and so at the moment 42% of drugs in the United States are now biomarker. If you have a biomarker, the drug will work. And that's twice a doubling of the number of people, a number of cancers that we know have biomarker drug pairing over 4 years. So we're every 4 years doubling how many of these cancers we can identify in a precision medicine way. In Australia, for say one cancer, small cell lung cancer, there's 10 drugs in the United States that are available, but only 3 can be afforded by people here in Australia. That's part of the reason the Australian government has done this new concept. So they're funded 185 million, it's not over a 5-year period, and they want a radical new approach. And I believe that if this is successful, it will start to be used in other complex diseases. It's a public-private joint venture for precision oncology, cancer treatment. It allows clinical trials to now be the new standard of care. So instead of going to the doctor and them having that one-size-fits-all paradigm, it means they do biomarkers. And if you've got the biomarker, you go straight into the clinical trial because they know the drug will work for you. The drugs are provided free by the industry because that means in rare diseases, they get more people that will actually be in that trial. And so therefore they'll know that the drugs work on those particular people quicker. That saves lives. And it also means that more people get the right drug sooner. And it halves the treatment costs for the patients, for everybody. So this is, I think, going to be a new way that governments around the world will actually start to use precision medicine. It's something that's already begun, and it's going to be, in the cancer field, it's made an enormous difference. And I think that for other complex diseases, it's what will happen in the future. So what do we need to make that possible in Parkinson's disease? We actually need more precise measurements of each person's type of Parkinson's. So a patient with Parkinson's, in fact, all of us, your genes are unique to you. So knowing more about genetics, the epigenetics is over your lifespan, you change the way your genes work by knowledge of what's happened to you. So you yourself change your genetics, and that's called epigenetics. In your gut, I don't know if a lot of you have known, but you have a lot of gut microbiota, which are bacteria and viruses that live in your gut. In fact, you have to have them. You can't actually absorb food without them. But The different gut microbiota is also important, and they have a genetic signature that's also unique to every person. And how that interacts with you could be a factor in Parkinson's disease. Environment, we know that people who, one of the risk factors can be pesticides. And so we've known that for a while, but there's probably other environmental influences that we haven't actually looked at, something that we need to know more about. Measuring anything in the brain is actually really good because each person will have slightly different ways their brain will work. Your lifestyles will be different. So if we do much better measurements of everything that affects the person, we'll get more precision into knowing what might be influencing an individual's Parkinson's. So this is just the list of people, a list of things we could measure on the left. And we already have ability by very clever mathematical algorithms that can actually then look at different aspects. So we could run all of those different data sets through and actually try to do regression analyses that will tell us what will give people risk of progression, risk of disease. We can classify people into types of disease, which I said to you might actually have different focused treatments. And that can be clustered in a variety of different ways. So these are mechanisms we already have. We just haven't collected all the data to be able to run the actual algorithms so that we could then think about treating in a different way for different aspects of the disease. Treat the more individual Parkinson's. Now, it's not like people haven't started. There's actually a resource called Parkinson's Disease Big Data. It's being put together in the United States. They've put together for a large number of people that have agreed, taking molecular omics data, imaging data of the brain, clinical phenotyping by clever neurologists, and lifestyle factors that they've actually gathered from those people. They've put it into a large database, and they call it PD Big Data. And then what they've been doing with that is they've been actually starting to look at what would be outcomes, which they're calling PD small data. They've been looking at genetic risks for PD. We now have 90 genes that have been identified that are potentially risk genes for PD, and they'll continue to do that. They're looking at biomarkers for diagnosis and for treatment, which will be important, as I just explained. Precision medicine will rely on biomarkers. Non-genetic risk factors and prevention. And I thought I'd just show you that particular data set because that's an application of how they're actually thinking about it. So of the PD, of this precision medicine, they've actually identified that there's some positive lifestyle things: drinking tea and coffee, smoking, fresh vegetables, nuts, spices, wine, all the good things, which is not bad. And negative, sleep duration, habitually longer sleep duration is a problem. Excessive daytime sleepiness, high carbohydrate diet, high intake of animal fat, dairy product, and working night shifts. So these are things that have come out of the current big data set. And as they gather more and more, these sorts of things will be able to identify more in the future. So, as I said, the complex progressive diseases are unlikely to be cured by a single target drug therapy. And even though even though we've been talking about cancer treatment and drug therapies, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a single drug. Often they're multiple drugs. So the way they actually have a biomarker is that they can measure what's happening in the cells, but that might be that there's a network of cellular interactions. And you need to actually potentially use multiple drugs to actually restore the function. And for example, when you're treating HIV, AIDS, it's 3 antiviral therapies that you take for an effective treatment, but it's single pill. but multiple drugs. And that's now how they treat heart failure and a number of other complex diseases. So it's unlikely to be a single drug, although you might take a single pill, but it'll be multiple drugs that will affect those multiple cellular pathways that I identified. I won't go through this slide because the main thing is combination therapies for Parkinson's are more likely to be effective. Now, combination therapies are things that, like precision medicine, more and more people are looking at, and it's more becoming the norm. So as I said, HIV, AIDS therapy is something that everyone would know about, but even vaccinations. I mean, now you'll get a flu vaccination, which will have a combination of vaccines for multiple flus, and in the future, probably COVID as well. So multiple therapies in a single dose of something is usually the norm. And there's a good history of drug combinations in Parkinson's. For example, a lot of people will be taking drug combinations that will affect different types of different places of the dopamine system, either at the receptor level or stopping it being decayed so that you get the dopamine therapy for longer. Unfortunately, as I said, the dopamine therapy doesn't stop progression. So there's more recent trials that have actually used drug combinations in Parkinson's, and they've used antioxidants, anti-diabetic agents such as exenatide. They've used different growth factors in addition to dopamine. All dopamines are stable, they actually add on. And they've indicated that it's now possible to slow, stop, and in some reverse Parkinson's disease. So my feeling is that we're at a stage in medicine where precision medicine is going to be helpful, and that the current drugs on dopamine aren't actually attacking the cellular problem that we need to, and that we'll have to monitor, identify and monitor cellular dysfunctions in people using biomarkers. We determine the impact of such dysfunction on specific symptoms with clever people like Eli and Simon, because it'll be easier to see in a person symptomatically, in addition to having hopefully a blood test or an imaging test. Treat the cellular dysfunction in subsets of patients that have similar dysfunctions, just like the cancer patients, and use multiple treatments, because unfortunately the disease doesn't just affect one pathway in the cell. And then monitor the treatments and determine any side effects, because unfortunately taking any drugs actually has side effects as well, as probably all of you know. So, but I think it's doable. This won't cure the disease, but it should actually cure most of the symptoms for many people.